Hey everyone, lazy historian here. Think you could survive medieval life? Spoiler, you wouldn't. Before we dive into the mud, blood, and no running water, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what century would not suit you? Now, brace yourself, history's about to get uncomfortable. Congratulations! You're alive in 1325. That's the good news. The bad news is you wake up mouth first in a medieval mattress, which is less mattress and more worm-riddled hay pile soaked in ancestral sorrow. The straw pokes your back like nature's acupuncture, and the smell, oh the smell, is a pungent cocktail of goat breath, fermented damp, and the kind of sweat that only comes from 3 generations of unwashed lineage. You're not alone. No. One is. Your hut, a one-room wooden box nailed together by hope and peasant desperation, houses your entire family, plus 2 chickens, a goat with attitude issues, and at least one cousin who never leaves and never blinks. Privacy isn't a concept here. It's a fairy tale whispered by nobility who live in castles with doors. You live in what amounts to a drafty shed with walls so thin you can hear your neighbor fart through a sneeze. Your blanket, if you can call it that, is a woolen slab so crusted over from winters past it might legally qualify as medieval armor. It hasn't been washed since the last harvest and now harbors a thriving colony of lice who treat your scalp like rent-controlled property. You try to stretch, but your joints crack like dried beans. You're 22 years old, which by medieval standards makes you eligible for sainthood or burial. Your spine feels like it's been folded into an origami goat, and your knees click in Morse code begging for early retirement. The floor beneath you is a patchwork of dirt, straw, and something that was once edible, now fermenting into a new life form. It's either wet from last night's rain leaking through the thatched roof, or sticky from a domestic accident involving your cousin, a candle, and what historians would generously call curiosity. Your feet touch down and instantly regret it. Welcome to the floor. It's alive. The air is cold enough to freeze your regrets mid-thought, and damp enough that everything you own is slightly soggy. Speaking of possessions, you don't have many. A wooden bowl, a spoon whittled into a weapon, and the tunic on your back, which is also your nightshirt, workwear, formal wear, and burial shroud, depending on how today goes. This tunic hasn't been washed in months, which is fine because you haven't either. Water is for drinking, barely, and boiling pigs for feast days. Bathing is frowned upon. Literally. Your neighbors will report you to the priest if you seem too clean. Cleanliness invites disease, you see, or worse, suspicion. A peasant too clean is clearly hiding something, probably heresy. You sit up. Not by choice but because the fleas have declared your lower back a war zone. You scratch instinctively and look around. Everyone else is already awake, blinking slowly like barn owls caught in a theological crisis. Your younger siblings are fighting over the crust of yesterday's bread. Your mother is already grinding grain with the kind of resigned expression usually reserved for funerals or marriage negotiations. Your father is coughing in the corner, hacking up something that might have once been a lung, but no one reacts. Coughing is part of the morning chorus, like church bells, but wetter. Speaking of which, the bells clang in the distance. Not melodically. No, they sound like someone is beating a cathedral with a shovel. It's time to get up. Not that you ever really sleep. Sleep in medieval Europe is more of a suggestion than a reality. You drift off between rat rustles and baby cries, only to be jolted awake by wind, wolves, or the existential dread that your soul might not be absolved before you die of infected splinters. Your bedmates snore like they are being exorcised. One of them probably is. There's no breakfast waiting for you. There's no kitchen. The hearth, the closest thing to an appliance, is just a smoldering pit of ash and wishful thinking. If you're lucky, there's pottage left over from last night or the night before. It's never quite clear. Pottage is the culinary equivalent of giving up. A thick, grey-brown paste of boiled barley, turnips, and anything vaguely edible scraped off the floor. It's been reheated so many times it now contains the hopes and disappointments of your entire lineage. There's bread too, but it's less bread and more medieval stonework. Hard, coarse, and likely bulked up with sawdust or bark, because wheat is for people who can afford not to die. As you shuffle toward the doorway, a hole in the wall covered by a goat skin, you take a moment to appreciate your surroundings. A dirt floor, smoke-stained beams, and above you, a thatched roof populated by spiders, mold, and possibly one of your ancestors who just gave up trying to escape. It leaks in the rain and breeds mosquitoes in the summer. Home sweet hell. And so your day begins. Not with joy, not with promise, but with a deep, bone-rattling itch and the quiet knowledge that you must spend the next 12 hours laboring in fields that don't belong to you, for a Lord who won't remember your name, under a sky that might bless you. With rain or kill you with hail, and no one will see the difference. Welcome to the Middle Ages. You're awake, you're itchy, and you're already losing. Your bladder is now screaming louder than the church bell. Congratulations, you've survived the medieval awakening ritual and are immediately thrust into the sequel, medieval sanitation. Spoiler alert, it's not a redemption arc. There is no bathroom. There is no seat. There is no privacy, plumbing, or dignity. There is only the outhouse if you're lucky, and the bucket if you're not. You step outside, barefoot, into the morning sludge, cold mud mixed with goat droppings, old turnip peels, and something you don't ask questions about. Your destination, the family privy. It's a generous term. What you're heading toward is a wooden box with a hole, built over a pit that doubles as a chemical weapon. It reeks with the kind of force that makes your eyes water and your ancestors reconsider reproducing. The door, barely hanging on by a splinter and a prayer, creaks open to reveal the throne of shame. It's been used by every member of your family, multiple times a day, for years. The seat is permanently damp. The smell is biblical. The flies are the true landlords here, and they are not taking visitors. You hover like a traumatized stork and do what must be done. There is no toilet paper. That miracle is centuries away. You wipe with leaves if it's spring, moss if it's damp, or a rag that's been repurposed so many times it might legally count as an heirloom. Rich folks use wool scraps. You use whatever won't give you splinters. And you're careful. Because hemorrhoids are common and infection is basically a death sentence wrapped in pus. If it's raining, and it probably is, you do this under a thatch of wet straw, while your shoes sink into the muck and your dignity evaporates. If you live in a town, the setup is even worse. You've got a chamber pot. It's filled overnight and dumped into the street in the morning. Not carefully. Not with any coordination. Just flung from windows while someone yells, "Gardaloo." A warning that's more ritual than effective. Pedestrians unlucky enough to pass by get baptized in human consequences. The streets aren't paved with gold. They are paved with yesterday's stew, today's regrets, and a slurry of dung that flows downhill, metaphorically and literally. Towns stink. Always. The air is heavy with the tang of ammonia and wet rot. Open gutters run through the center of the street like disease highways. You walk carefully, balancing between death puddles and angry chickens. The chickens are territorial and have better hygiene than you. If you happen to be in a castle, surely they do it better, right? Ha! Welcome to the guardrobe, a stone chute built into the outer wall. You squat over a hole, your business drops straight into the moat, and the stench wafts back up like a vengeful ghost. Enemies have been known to sneak in through these waste chutes. That's right. Intruders willing to swim through raw sewage just to stab a duke in his bed. That's how bad the plumbing is, it doubles as a murder route. And if you're outside the village, maybe in the field, you just squat behind a bush and hope a wild boar doesn't mistake you for breakfast. Modesty isn't a concern. Everyone poops, and in the Middle Ages, everyone watches, whether they mean to or not. Your neighbors know your schedule better than your spouse. Privacy is non-existent, and shame is something you stopped affording after your third lice infestation. Hygiene. That's not a word in your language. Washing your hands is a luxury reserved for religious rituals and the dying. Soap exists, technically, made of animal fat and lye, but it's harsh, rare, and mostly used for laundry. You rinse with cold water from a bucket and call it a day. Germ theory won't show up for another 500 years, so most people assume smells are the disease itself. Which is partially true, given the microbial horror show you just stepped out of. But that doesn't mean anyone does anything about it. If you do wash, it's in a river downstream from where the livestock bathe and the butcher dumps his scraps. So congratulations. You're now clean in the medieval sense, which means slightly less encrusted with filth. And you haven't even brushed your teeth yet. Because you won't. You've emptied your bowels, possibly your soul, and now it's time to reward yourself with the most underwhelming moment of the medieval day, breakfast. Or as it's known in your hovel, a warm lie. You sit, squat, really, by the hearth, which is just a charred hole in the floor surrounded by stone and disappointment. The fire from last night is dead. The ashes are cold, much like your expectations. You don't eat to enjoy yourself. You eat to survive. And even that's debatable. Your meal is pottage, again, always. A viscous, sludgy concoction of grains, water, and whatever root vegetables didn't rot into snot in the cellar. Think oatmeal, if oatmeal had given up on its dreams and moved back in with its parents. The pot it simmers in hasn't been cleaned since your grandmother died in it. New ingredients just get dumped on top, layer after layer, like a compost heap with seasoning. There is no seasoning. Salt costs more than your dignity. Herbs are for the wealthy. You have turnip stems and a prayer next to the pottage you gnaw. On bread. Not fresh, not soft, not remotely friendly. It's rye or barley, coarsely ground with stones, and so dense it could be used as a defensive weapon in a siege. Every bite sands your molars down a bit more, which is historically accurate. Archaeologists find peasant teeth worn flat, as though medieval mouths doubled as millstones. And they kind of did. The bread isn't just gritty, it's riddled with fungus in bad years. If it's rice season, you might get a bonus dose of ergot, a hallucinogenic mold that causes convulsions, gangrene, and visions of the Virgin Mary whispering your sins into a goat's ear. Bon appetit. Your drink. Beer. Not because it's fun, but because it's less deadly than water. This isn't pub beer. It's small beer, cloudy, lukewarm, and fermented just enough to kill the worst parasites without knocking you out before sunrise. Children drink it. Infants drink it. You drink it and pretend it's a cleansing ritual instead of proof your civilization gave up on hydration. The water from the stream is technically clearer, but so is your neighbor's chamber pot, and both flow into the same ditch by noon. If it's Sunday or a feast day and your landlord isn't mad at your family for breathing too loudly during Mass, you might get a bit of cheese or a strip of salted pork. But those are rare, suspiciously generous miracles, like finding an unchewed piece of bone in your stew and wondering which noble you accidentally pleased. Breakfast is communal, but not social. No one talks. You chew. You slurp. You stare into the fireless hearth and contemplate mortality. The children eat from the same bowl with their hands. The dog licks it afterward. Then someone wipes it with a rag made from an old undergarment and shoves it back on the shelf. You wonder if God is watching, and if so, why he hasn't intervened yet. Probably because he's too busy smiting other villages with the plague. Or approving another crusade. Food is sacred, sure, but also feared. Spoilage is common. Rats are competitors. And every bite carries the lingering question, will this keep me alive or be the last thing I regret? There are no second helpings. No seconds. Sometimes no firsts. The harvest was bad this year, again. So was the year before. You've been mixing acorn meal into your flour just to stretch it. You think you taste bark. It could be bark. It could be the table. You eat it anyway. Hunger sharpens your judgment into a weapon you can't use. You watch your neighbor chew slowly and wonder if she has extra stored away. You feel envy, then guilt, then nausea. Not from the guilt. From the pottage. Breakfast ends not with fullness, but with a kind of defeated energy. Your stomach is occupied but not satisfied. Your breath smells like fermented oats and future regret. You wipe your mouth with your sleeve and rub your hands together for warmth that never arrives. The fire still isn't lit. You've saved the kindling for evening when the cold sneaks into your bones and starts nesting. You rise reluctantly. Your knees creak. Your back spasms in Morse code. And now it's time to go to work. The food in your belly will fuel a day of manual labor that ends in pain, blood, and possibly divine judgment, but you don't think about that. You don't think about anything except walking out the door and hoping you don't step in last. Night's chamber pot runoff. Breakfast isn't a beginning. It's a sentence. And you've just served your daily portion. You've scraped the pottage off your teeth with stale bread and rinsed your regrets with peasant-grade beer. Now it's time to get dressed, though getting dressed in 1325 is more ritual humiliation than morning routine. Your wardrobe, if you can call it that, consists of exactly one outfit. 1. A rough wool tunic so coarse it could exfoliate paint off a church wall. It's the same tunic you wore yesterday, last week, and at your cousin's wedding. It's your daily wear, your nightwear, your funeral attire in waiting. There's no rotation, no options, and definitely no clean laundry. You grab it from the hook near the hearth, where it's been hanging like a sad flag of defeat, and shake off the fleas. They scatter, but not far. They know they'll be home soon. You step into the garment with the enthusiasm of a condemned man dressing for his own execution. It's damp, of course. Everything is damp. The wool clings to your body like an itchy parasite, soaked with old sweat, rain, and the memory of failed harvests. There's a hole under one arm from that time you got too close to the blacksmith's fire, and a stain on the hem from the day the pig gave birth in the corner of your hovel. No one asks. Everyone knows. It's a communal stain now. Underwear is optional in the Middle Ages, and by optional, we mean virtually non-existent unless you're a monk or a noble with delusions of comfort. If you have a linen undertunic, you're already above average. If not, you go commando under that woolen vice grip and pretend your thighs aren't about to chafe into oblivion. You tie it at the waist with a belt made of braided cord or leather. Assuming it hasn't snapped from the last time you bent over too fast. It holds your knife, your pouch of nothing, and sometimes your dignity, though not reliably. There are no socks. Not unless your mother spent the winter darning them out of scrap cloth and prayer. You might wrap your feet in rags. You might not. Footwear is a debate between luxury and necessity. Most peasants go barefoot unless it's snowing or they have to impress the bailiff. If you do own shoes, congratulations, they are turn shoes, thin leather slippers stitched by someone whose definition of waterproof involves denial. They have no soles, no structure, and no sympathy. Step into a puddle and you might as well be barefoot. Step on a nail and your next trip is to the barber surgeon for an amputation and a leech bath. The shoes wear through quickly, but replacing them means giving up a week's worth of bread. So you patch them with twine, hope, and the skin of a goat you once loved. They smell like death and feel like guilt. You look around and see everyone else in the village is dressed the same, variations on the theme of brown. Brown tunics, brown cloaks, brown faces stained with the same mud that lines your path to the fields. Dye is expensive. Color is for those who pay no taxes or pay people to dye for them. You might see a flash of green or blue on a feast day if someone managed to trade a chicken for some plant dye that didn't fade into gray after the first rain. Your cloak, if you have one, is an old sackcloth lined with more holes than fabric. It smells like smoke, mildew, and the inside of your worst decision. It provides no warmth but does a fantastic job of soaking up water. There are no buttons. Just laces and pins, both of which poke you at inopportune moments. Your garments hang like regret stitched together by necessity. You've tried washing your tunic before once. It involved hauling water from the well, boiling it over a fire that took 2 hours to start, scrubbing the wool with ashes and sand, and then watching it dry stiff in the wind like medieval cardboard. The result? Slightly less stink in a fabric. Texture somewhere between burlap and punitive sandpaper. It wasn't worth it. Now you just let the rain do the work. Maybe. Lice. Yes. Everyone has them. Nobles. Priests. You. They nest in your hair, your clothes, and your sheets, though sheets is a generous term for the strip of linen stained with the tears of ancestral suffering. You scratch behind your ear and flick something into the fire. No one blinks. Everyone's got their own colonies. Hygiene is more of a concept than a practice, and your skin is the battlefield. Rashes. Boils. Scabs. All part of the medieval aesthetic. You're a walking symptom. But you've got work to do. So you wrap your aching limbs in wool, tie your belt, and shove your feet into sacks of leather and hope. You're ready. Not for success. Not for comfort. But to endure another day dressed in pain, dressed in poverty, dressed in the fabric of systemic oppression. This is fashion in 1325, less style, more survival. And you, my friend, are runway ready for another slow-motion collapse into history. Your clothes are on, your soul is fraying, and now it's time to flash that medieval smile, assuming you still have the teeth to flash. Spoiler, you don't. Oral hygiene in the 14th century is a concept so foreign it might as well be witchcraft. And treating your mouth like a compost pile is the cultural norm. You don't brush your teeth. Not because you forgot, but because toothbrushes haven't been invented and toothpaste sounds like the fever dream of a faraway future. Instead, if you're feeling particularly ambitious, you might chew on a mint twig, or rinse with cold beer, or maybe scrape at the filth with a shard of wood in a desperate prayer to Saint Apollonia, patron saint of dental despair. But most days, you don't even bother. Why would you? You've been eating bread ground on stone mills that sneak little gifts of grit and gravel into every bite. It's like exfoliating your enamel with a handful of pebbles 3 times a day. Your molars are flatter than your prospects, your gums are a battlefield of abscesses and bleeding sores, and every tooth in your head is one bad winter away from being evicted. You know pain. Not abstract, philosophical pain, the medieval kind that gnaws your jaw, pulses behind your eye, and reminds you with every heartbeat that your skull is a fragile cage for rot and regret. A toothache isn't a minor inconvenience. It's a harbinger of doom. It keeps you awake, makes you useless in the field, and eventually turns you into a drooling, fevered husk muttering to God about deliverance via pliers or death, whichever comes first. There is no dentist. There's a barber. And he has a knife, a steady hand, and absolutely no training beyond "I once saw this done to a cow." He will not ask for consent. He will not use anesthesia. He will hold your jaw in place with one hand and pry with the other, while your neighbors hold your legs and you scream into a rag that smells like last week's mutton stew. If you're lucky, the tooth comes out. If you're unlucky, your jaw breaks, the wound festers, and you die choking on your own infected blood. Either way, the barber still charges you. Probably in eggs. Rich folks fare no better, really. They have access to sugar, the most exotic rotten juicer of the age, imported at absurd prices and used to show off wealth through prematurely blackened smiles. Their teeth dissolve like parchment in a thunderstorm, and they rot out faster than their morals. Some nobles even keep their teeth in a decorative box when they fall out early, as if collecting your own decay is a hobby. The rest of us just let them fall where they may, into the pottage, onto the floor, or into the fire, where at least they serve as a warning. There is no floss. There is no mouthwash. There is no understanding of bacteria, infection, or the reason why your breath smells like a dying raccoon. You don't know why your teeth hurt, you just know that when they do, you are useless, enraged. And one step closer to the grave. The standard remedy is herbal. Chamomile for swelling. Clove for pain. If you're lucky, your village herbalist isn't blind drunk and will mix you a poultice made of crushed sage and spit. If you're unlucky, you'll get goat dung mixed with vinegar and a prayer in bad Latin. There's no numbing. There's just distraction, usually in the form of holy relics, chanting, or biting down on a stick while your body vibrates with the kind of pain that rewrites your understanding of mercy. You might try to hide your dental decay. Smile with your lips pressed shut, talk less, eat carefully. But eventually, the swelling betrays you. Your face puffs up on one side like a medieval pastry gone wrong, your speech slurs and your appetite disappears. People begin to avoid you. Not because they care about catching anything, nobody believes in germs, but because your breath now has a physical presence. It lingers in the air like a curse. And if the swelling bursts, if the abscess inside your gum ruptures and floods your mouth with pus and blood, congratulations. You've survived the worst part. Until infection sets in, crawls down your neck, and quietly rots you from the inside. Death by dental infection is so common it doesn't even make gossip. No one writes songs about it. No one carves a tombstone. You just disappear into the ground. Your soul carrying the memory of every agonized night spent clutching your jaw and bargaining with saints. So yes, you've dressed, you've eaten, you've voided your bowels into the street, and now, with your teeth loose in your skull and your breath offensive enough to be considered a war crime, you march forward into the day. You are the proud owner of a mouthful of pain and historical accuracy. You smile, and the world winces. Welcome to the Middle Ages. Your teeth won't make it to Christmas. Now that your gums are inflamed, your breath could peel bark, and your tunic smells like mildew and medieval depression. It's time to get to work. Not the kind of work with purpose or reward. No, you're a peasant, which means your job is survival through exhaustion. You don't clock in. You don't get paid. You don't aspire. You wake, you work, you wither. Welcome to feudal labor, where productivity is enforced by hunger and your office is the field, the barn, or the pit, depending on what God has planned for you today. You step outside into a morning thick with mist and the unshakable scent of pig urine, and the sun is already climbing, judgmental and unsympathetic. Your landlord, a man who owns everything including the rights to your first sneeze, expects you in the fields before the dew dries, or else he starts docking your already theoretical earnings. You walk to the field barefoot or in your collapsing shoes, navigating mud, dung, and stones sharp enough to double as surgical instruments. Your tools: a wooden hoe, a blunt scythe, and your own increasingly rebellious body. There is no ergonomics. Your handle is splintered, your grip is raw, and your back is bent like a question mark no one's answering. You start by plowing. If it's spring, that means dragging a wooden plow through wet soil so heavy it clings like guilt. If you're lucky, you have an ox to pull it. If you're unlucky, you are the ox. You plant seeds, barley, rye, whatever might grow this year if the rain comes and the rats don't. Then you weed, by hand, on your knees, until your joints scream louder than the priest during confession. You do this for hours. In silence. Or worse, with your cousin humming something repetitive and off-key. There are no breaks. No lunch bell. Just hunger gnawing at your ribs until your stomach gives up and goes quiet. You pause to gnaw on stale bread, maybe chew on a wild onion, and drink warm beer from a cracked jug. Then you keep going. Because if you don't, someone else will. And they'll take your patch of dirt and your future with it. If it's harvest season, the tempo changes but the suffering doesn't. Now it's scything time. Row after row of wheat or barley or something that might have been edible before the mold got to it. You bend, cut, bundle, and haul, all under a sun that refuses to blink. Blisters bloom on your hands like grotesque flowers. Your shoulders feel like they've been nailed to your spine. You bleed, you limp, you pray not for strength, but for a minor injury that might let you lie down for a day without being accused of sloth. And if it rains, too bad. You work in the wet. The Lord's crops come before your bones, your fever, or the child you're carrying on your hip while hoeing with one hand and wiping your nose with the other. Because if you're a woman, congratulations. You get to do all this plus cook. Clean, spin, sew, fetch water, birth humans, and try not to die of anything inconvenient. Children help too, by the way. No age minimum. If they can walk, they can weed. You hand your toddler a small rake and teach them that life is toil. They don't ask why. They already know. You're not building anything. You're maintaining. A system designed to bleed you dry and replace you when you falter. You don't own your land. You don't own your labor. You're a tenant in the dirt, a breathing extension of someone else's profit margins. Your Lord visits once a season, dressed like a peacock, and nods vaguely in your direction before riding back to his manor to feast on meats you can't pronounce. You work 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset, and on Sunday you rest. By rest, we mean you walk 2 miles to church, kneel for hours on cold stone, confess sins like a sighing too loud or covered in bread with raisins, and then stagger home to start the misery cycle again. Your body is a record of this abuse. Your back is hunched. Your hands are swollen. Your feet are cracked. You're 27 and look 60. There's no pension. No retirement. Just a slow descent into infirmity while your eldest son takes your place, swings your hoe, and inherits your debts. So yes, you've survived breakfast, dressed in rags, ignored the growing infection in your jaw, and now you're breaking your spine for barley you won't get to eat. Welcome to work in the Middle Ages. The pay is nothing, the benefits are lice, and the only upward mobility is literal, being carried uphill in a coffin. You've spent the morning breaking your back for someone else's bread, and now, as you glance across the field through a haze of sweat and spiritual fatigue, you spot your youngest staggering under the weight of a water jug twice the size of his malnourished torso. He is 5 years old, barefoot, filthy, and officially employed. Welcome to medieval childhood, a phase of life so short and punishing it barely qualifies as a separate category. Childhood is not innocent here. It's apprenticeship for suffering. The moment a child can walk without falling into the hearth, they are handed a tool, a task, or a sibling to carry. There is no nursery, no kindergarten, no toys except sticks, bones, and the occasional pig bladder balloon. Your child's first words were probably "Yes, my lord," followed closely by "Please don't beat me." Education is not a right. It's a theological luxury reserved for sons of nobility and boys being groomed for priesthood. Your children don't read. They don't write. They count with their fingers and pray with their eyes closed because everything else is considered backtalk. School is a pasture and the lesson is obedience. Your son spends the day fetching water from the nearest stream, which, depending on the season, is either a frozen trickle, a muddy slop, or a disease-ridden torrent crawling with things that twitch. The jug he carries leaks. His tunic is damp. His feet are cut from brambles and stones, and when he trips, which he does, often, you don't rush to help him. You can't. You're ankle deep in wheat that needs binding before the sun abandons you. So he picks himself up, wipes the blood on his sleeve, and tries again. Resilience isn't taught. It's expected. Your daughter, slightly older, is crouched in the shadow of the barn, plucking feathers from a half-dead chicken while simultaneously keeping an eye on her younger siblings and stirring the pot of boiling greens that will become tonight's supper sludge. She isn't playing house. She's running one. Domestic chores don't scale by age. They arrive all at once, like a divine punishment. Grinding grain on the quern stone, 2 slabs of rock. That chew more fingers than flour, takes hours and pulverizes knuckles into soup. Carrying firewood, scrubbing chamber pots, feeding pigs, patching tunics, boiling water, all done by hands still soft from the cradle and now permanently calloused before puberty. There are no breaks, no naps, no snacks. If your children stop working, it's because they've fainted. If they cry, you tell them to hush lest the priest think your house is harboring demons. If they play, it's only in the accidental moments between tasks, chasing a chicken for fun before realizing it's tonight's dinner. Illness is common and fatal. Your children get sick all the time, coughing, fevers, rashes, worms, but unless they are vomiting blood or growing black spots, you don't stop the day to fuss. You rub them with lard, mumble a prayer, and send them back to the field. Some recover. Some don't. Infant mortality is so high you don't name a child with full enthusiasm until their 5th birthday. Many don't make it that far. The cemetery is full of siblings whose names you reused out of thrift and superstition. If one survives, it's because they were strong, lucky, or born under a saint's feast day. Maybe all 3. When evening falls, your children don't curl up with bedtime stories. They collapse. Wherever they are, on straw pallets, under tables, in the barn with the goat, they drop into sleep like stones, still wearing the day's sweat, scratches, and existential dread. You might hum something while you knit, but lullabies are mostly for your benefit, a whispered apology to the children you couldn't shield from the brutal lottery of being born peasant. Tomorrow, your eldest will rise early to join you in the fields. Your youngest will be weeding the garden with a stick, swatting flies with one hand and holding their swollen belly with the other, hoping for a turnip that isn't rotten. There's no childhood here. Just small, tired bodies playing adult until death or adolescence grants them a new job title. Medieval child is an oxymoron, and your children know it. They don't dream of toys or adventures. They dream of a full belly, dry feet, and a winter that doesn't steal another sibling. You watch them sleep, curled like puppies on a dirt floor, and you pray. Not for miracles. You're too practical for that. You pray for rain. For a mild fever instead of a deadly one. For the landlord to forget your debt this season. You pray they make it to 6. Maybe 7. Long enough to be useful. Long enough to be remembered. Long enough to suffer just a little less than you did. If you're a woman in 1325, you don't wake up, you resurface, like something pulled unwillingly from a bog. There is no dawn chorus of gentle sunlight and soft linens, just a child screaming because their face met a chicken beak in the communal bedding, and the smell of damp wool and burning regret rising from the hearth. Your day begins not with choice, but with obligation, and ends the same way. You don't get to be tired. Fatigue is as constant and compulsory as your shadow. Before your feet even touch the muddy floor, you're calculating how many mouths need feeding, how many hours of daylight remain, and whether your aching womb will survive another winter. You pull on your dress, wool, itchy, brown, stitched by your mother before she died in childbirth, same as her mother before her, and begin the first task of the day, making sure everything doesn't fall apart faster than it already is. Your morning begins with fire, assuming the coals haven't died. You kneel, blow until your eyes water, and coax life into wet logs with the desperation of someone who knows cold can kill a baby faster than a fever. Then, water. It doesn't fetch itself. You walk a quarter-mile with a bucket balanced on your hip, which was dislocated 3 children ago. The path is slick with manure and guilt. The well is communal. So is the gossip, and both run deep. You nod to the other women, all similarly hunched, all similarly trapped, and hold back your ration of dysentery. You boil it, but only if there's fuel to spare, which there usually isn't. Then breakfast. Grinding grain on the quern stone, back-breaking, shoulder-splitting labor that creates a grey mash thick enough to spoon and sad enough to regret. You mix it with beer, because water is betrayal, and feed it to children who stare with hollow eyes and swollen bellies. Then the spinning. Always spinning. Your hands are never idle. Flax, wool, whatever's available, twisted and teased into thread as your fingers crack from cold and your nails wear to nubs. You do this while walking, while breastfeeding, while muttering under your breath because the priest says silence is virtuous, but you know better. Silence is death. You weave cloth on a loom built by your grandfather, operated by your knees, your feet, your willpower. The cloth is coarse, scratchy, and demanded as tax by the Lord who hasn't stepped on this soil in 3 years. If you're lucky, you get to keep enough for a new tunic. If you're not, your child goes naked until spring. Domestic work is relentless. There is no done. You scrub floors that are just dirt. You sweep out livestock that sleep inside. You wipe the table, which is a plank. You stir the stew, which is disappointment. You birth the babies, bury the babies, soothe the sick, and mourn in silence because crying wastes time. Childbirth is its own battlefield. There's no midwife. No herbs, no sterilization, just you, a neighbor, and the hope your body remembers how to survive this again. And if it doesn't, you're sewn up in your best tunic and laid out in the same bed where you conceived, labored, and died. Still alive. Good. Time to tend the garden. You bend, plant, weed, and water until your knees lock and your back spasms. Your husband might help if he's not drunk or dead or off serving some lord in a war that won't matter. Even when he's home, he doesn't notice the blisters or the bruises or the way your breath hitches when lifting the pail. If he's angry, you brace for blows. There is no recourse. The law is his and the priest agrees. Your body belongs to your husband, your work belongs to your Lord, and your soul is perpetually on loan to the Virgin Mary for safekeeping. There is no rest. Evening means dinner, another pot of boiled sadness, and patching torn clothing by candlelight while children cry and your fingers bleed. You sleep on a straw mattress next to 5 other bodies, hoping none of them vomit, cough blood, or die. Before dawn, you dream of nothing because your body is too tired for dreams. You wake to repeat it. Every day. Without thanks. Without choice. Without even a name, eventually just wife, mother, or that woman who didn't survive the last winter. Yet somehow you endure. Because you have to. Because no one else is going to hold the water, grind the flour, spin the wool, heal the fever, bury the dead, or feed the living. You hold it all together with fingers cracked by cold and a spine bowed by duty. You aren't remembered in chronicles. You don't appear in stained glass or painted tapestries. But you're there in every stitch, every brick, every bitter stew that kept a family alive one more day. Your work is invisible, essential, and endless. And so is your suffering. Welcome to womanhood in the Middle Ages. You're not a person. You're a system of labor. And the system never sleeps. You've spun the wool, fetched the water, birthed a child in a corner, and buried a turnip for supper, which means it's time for everyone's favorite medieval paradox, hygiene. Not that you'd recognize it if it slapped you across the face with a damp rag, which, ironically, is the closest thing you'll get to a bath this month. Cleanliness is a concept wrapped in suspicion and sprinkled with theological anxiety. People in 1325 believe bathing too often can open your pores and let disease in, like a backdoor invitation for the plague. The filth on your skin. Protective layer. The stench in your armpits. Divine barrier. And so you don't wash. Not really. You wipe. You scrape. You rub a leaf across your face and call it penance. Communal bathhouses do exist, but they are about as reputable as a brothel inn. A monastery. They are places of scandal, sex, and possibly syphilis, depending on the crowd and whether the bishop's in town. The church, naturally, disapproves. Clean bodies lead to unclean thoughts, apparently. Many bathhouses are shuttered or repurposed for more godly pursuits, like housing relics or brewing beer. If you do wash, it's not pleasant. You fetch water from a stream upstream from the tannery if you're smart, downstream if you're already riddled with parasites and have given up. You boil it if you have wood, which you usually don't, and pour it into a wooden tub that leaks as aggressively as your uncle after too much cider. Into this tepid swamp, you lower yourself like a sinner into purgatory. There is no soap. There is lye. Harsh, caustic, homemade soap that scalds the dirt off your skin and possibly your top layer of flesh too. You use it sparingly because you're not rich and the last time you scrubbed too hard you bled for 3 days. You wash your body, not your clothes. That's a separate misery. Laundry is done rarely and with tears. You lug garments, stiff with grease, filth, and despair, to the riverbank and slap them against rocks until something resembling fiber appears beneath the grime. Detergent is a luxury. You use ashes. Sometimes fermented urine. Yes, human waste. Because in the Middle Ages, ammonia is free and dignity is not. You rinse them, sort of, then hang them on a line stretched between your house and the pig pen. If it rains, which it does constantly, you just shrug and let nature take its course. After a day or two, the clothes feel marginally less cursed. You fold them. You reuse them. You wear them again until they fall apart, at which point you turn them into rags, diapers, or bandages, and the cycle of hygienic futility continues. Hair care is equally dismal. You might wash it quarterly, with rainwater and shame. You might comb it if you have a comb and no lice. Lice are not rare. Everyone has them. Priests, peasants, knights, your entire village is one massive, walking infestation. Fleas too. And bed bugs. And the occasional tick that has hitched a ride from the dog and now lives on your inner thigh. You scratch constantly, methodically. Without embarrassment. It's a communal activity. A social gesture. A medieval handshake. If your scalp starts bleeding, you assume it's penance. As for dental hygiene, well, that's been covered. But bad breath is so omnipresent it might as well be currency. You mask it with herbs if you're fancy. You don't if you're not. Everyone stinks. Your husband smells like sweat, cow, and sour ale. Your wife smells like onions, wet wool, and fatigue. You don't notice anymore. Your nostrils gave up years ago. Perfume is for the elite. You might carry a sachet of dried lavender to sniff when the latrine hits you in the soul, but even that's a rare indulgence. Then there's the latrine, or more commonly, the bucket. Your home has no plumbing. Your street has no drainage. You do your business in a wooden pail, then fling it into the alley under cover of darkness or with a shouted warning that everyone ignores. The result is a community living in a stew of its own effluence. The air smells like rot and resignation. The floors are sticky. The walls are streaked with mildew. And the concept of a clean home is more fantasy than fact. So yes, you're technically alive, but your skin is a biohazard, your clothes a compost, and your house is a petri dish with a thatched roof. Welcome to hygiene, medieval style. You wash when you must. You wipe when you can. You hope the neighbors are smellier than you and that the lice don't discover your soft parts before you fall asleep. Because nothing says survival like going to bed knowing you'll wake up dirtier than you went to sleep. And still, you're one of the lucky ones. Because at least you still have skin. It's midday. The sun is punishing, your tunic is glued to your back with sweat, and you've just hauled 2 sacks of barley across a field that might actually be hell's front porch. You're thirsty, desperately, throat-clawingly thirsty, and you do the unthinkable, consider drinking water. Not beer. Not weak ale. Actual, honest-to-God water. And just like that, you've invited medieval death to tea. Because in 1325, drinking water is less hydration, more roulette with dysentery. The stream looks inviting, clear, bubbling, shaded by a patch of trees that haven't yet died of peasant despair. You kneel, cup your hands, and sip. It's cold. Refreshing. Tastes slightly of moss and mystery. But you know what's waiting upstream. Everyone does. The butcher rinses his knives in this stream. The tanner dumps his animal guts here. Old. Women wash laundry soaked in disease. Someone emptied a chamber pot into it just this morning, possibly while humming a hymn. The pigs wade through it. Children play in it. The dead occasionally bloat in it. And now it's in you. Congratulations. If you're sensible, or at least seasoned, you drink ale instead. Not because you want to be drunk, but because ale has been boiled, fermented, and rendered slightly safer than raw water, which is essentially just a vessel for invisible agony. This ale isn't pleasant. It's flat, thick, and tastes like someone described a barley field to a bucket of pond water. But it won't kill you today, which makes it a premium beverage. Even children drink it. Especially children. The idea of letting your 7-year-old sip fresh water is laughable. You hand them a mug of warm, slightly fizzy beer and pray they don't grow up to be a poet. Beer is your hydration. Your medicine. Your daily bread in liquid form. And your only reliable defense against waterborne death. The rich drink wine. Of course. Imported, overpriced, diluted to the point of irrelevance. But it smells better than your ale and doesn't double as a laxative, which is enough to make it a luxury. The monks drink wine too, and they grow their own grapes in tidy cloisters far from your mud-soaked village. You once tasted it at a feast, a wedding, maybe a funeral, and it burned going down, sweet and strange. A noble's drink. Not for you. You go back to your mug, your ale, your daily baptism in fermented mediocrity. Bathing water is another story. You boil it, maybe. You strain it through cloth, if you're lucky enough to own a spare. You add herbs to it to mask the smell. But it still carries the scent of its history, of being shared, reused, and discarded by everyone within walking distance. Rainwater is safer. You collect it in barrels lined with hope and mildew. But even that turns quickly, growing moss and bugs and sometimes frogs. And frogs, while divine in fables, do not make your skin cleaner. You might wonder why no one builds wells. They do. But not in every village. And not deep enough. And not always far enough from the latrines to make a difference. You draw water from it and try not to think about seepage, runoff, or the last time someone vomited in the bucket. You drink sparingly. You drink suspiciously. Because every gulp could be your last act of optimism. When illness does strike, and it always does, it starts subtly. A rumble in your stomach. A twinge. Then it escalates, cramps, fever, diarrhea. So relentless it becomes a full-time job. You sweat, you moan, you pray. Someone gives you an herb. Someone else suggests a charm. The village healer offers a brew that tastes like burnt dirt and sadness. Sometimes it works. Sometimes you die squatting in the corner, clutching your gut and cursing the day you ever trusted that glistening stream. In summer, it's worse. The heat ferments the water faster. Flies breed in it. The smell becomes unbearable. People pass out in fields, tongues swollen, lips cracked. Dehydration dances with dysentery in a duet of doom. And there's no relief. No modern solution. No clean tap waiting to gush forth salvation. Just jugs, barrels, pails, and the hope that what you're sipping isn't going to liquefy your insides. So you drink your ale. You pray over your water. You teach your children to fear the stream like it's possessed. And you survive, barely. Welcome to medieval hydration. Drink, and you might live. Don't drink, and you definitely won't. But always, always remember, thirst is pain, and water is poison that lies with a smile. As if the lice, the latrines, and the labor weren't enough, now the sky joins in with its own brand of medieval torment. There is no climate control. There is no insulation, thermostat, or even the vague concept of comfort. Weather in 1325 isn't just an environmental condition, it's a punishment system wielded by a petty god with a grudge against your entire bloodline. Winter arrives not as a season but as a siege. Your hovel, built from timber, mud, and generational sorrow, has more holes than your last confession. The thatched roof leaks. The wooden walls breathe. Your one window is a cloth flap that trembles when the wind howls like the souls of your ancestors begging for central heating. You wrap yourself in your one cloak, damp from yesterday's sleet, and crouch beside the hearth if the fire's still alive. Firewood is a luxury. You either pay for it with coin you don't have or gather it illegally from the Lord's forest, which could get you fined, flogged, or hanged depending on his mood. Yes, hanged for picking up sticks. You shiver beside the embers, trying to cook pottage that's frozen in the pot, and wonder whether you'll lose toes this year or just feeling in your fingers. Frost creeps along your bed, which is a collection of straw, damp linens, and wet livestock that now sleeps indoors because they are warmer than your children. You share body heat like it's currency, curling together into one quivering human furnace of desperation. The morning air hurts to breathe. Your breath clouds around your face and settles into your blanket, which now smells like wet wool and existential dread. You don't bathe. You barely move. You urinate in a bucket so you don't have to go outside and negotiate with the ice demons. And yet somehow, you survive. Until spring, which is no gift either, just mud season with bonus floods. The snow melts into your floor. Your livestock, half-rotten and frostbitten, track disease into your home with every clop. The river overflows, drowning your garden and carrying off your kindling stash. The wind knocks over your fence. Rain leaks through the roof, pattering into your soup. You dig trenches with a spoon and call it drainage. Your feet stay wet for weeks, your cough gets deeper, and every joint aches like a divine curse tailored just for you. Then comes summer, which in theory should be better. But you've seen theory. It lies. Summer is heat with no relief. Your hovel transforms into an oven. The thatch overhead traps heat like a vengeful sponge, and your walls, baked by sun and sin, radiate warmth like they are trying to cook you alive. You sweat. Constantly. You sweat into your clothes, into your shoes, into your bed. There is no change of wardrobe. No linen shifts. You wear wool because that's what you own, and wool doesn't care about your comfort. It itches. It clings. It marinates you in your own filth. You sleep naked, but there's no airflow, no breeze, just thick, mosquito-filled air that hangs like a curse. Every night, you lie awake, slick with sweat, swatting bugs that don't die, just retreat into your blankets to bite again later. Your skin becomes a battlefield of bites and boils. The air stinks of manure and stagnant water. Flies multiply. Rats squeak in the walls. Your food spoils before you can eat it. Cheese turns to mush, bread molds, meat crawls away. You eat it anyway. And then, for good measure, there's autumn. Harvest season, the time of reaping and aching. The fields must be cleared, the grain dried, the root vegetables dug out of the earth like buried hope. Rain returns, not helpful rain, but sideways rain that stings your eyes and turns every path into a mire. Your boots, if you still have any, suck into the muck. Your back creaks with every bundle lifted. Your hands are blistered and raw. You cough more. Everyone does. The air is colder. Your firewood pile, already pathetic, is half soaked. You work soaked, eat soaked, and collapse soaked. And as you stare into the low grey sky, you know what's coming next: another winter. Another stretch of months where you sleep in damp straw, light your last twig in the hearth, and pray to saints you can't name for just 1 week where nothing freezes or floods or bites. The weather doesn't change here. It only recalibrates. It's malice. There is no good season, only degrees of bodily betrayal. You are too cold or too hot, too wet or too parched, always one draft away from illness and one sunstroke from collapse. Welcome to the medieval climate. Dress in damp wool, eat your fungus soup, and keep your head down. The sky is watching. And it does not forgive. So you've stubbed your toe on a frozen pig skull, or inhaled too many fumes from that dubious cheese, or maybe your joints ache so badly your body feels like it's rebelling against existence itself, whatever the reason. Congratulations, you're now in urgent need of medieval healthcare, a service less restorative and more experimental theatre with bloodletting. First things first, you're not going to a hospital. That word doesn't mean what you think it does. In 1325, a hospital is a charitable hospice for the dying and destitute, operated by monks who are better at praying than prescribing, and whose primary treatment involves making you spiritually ready for death. There are no clean linens, no antiseptics, no concept of hygiene beyond not actively defecating on the altar. If you're rich, you might summon a learned physician trained in universities where Aristotle's ghost still dictates physiology through 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, a system so inaccurate it makes astrology look clinical. This man will examine your urine by sight, taste, and smell, and confidently declare that your spleen is hot and moist, which is apparently a problem. But you're not rich. You're a peasant. So your healer is either a barber, a village herbalist, or a traveling bone setter with a sack full of tinctures and a knife that's been through more infections than repentance. The diagnosis is always the same: imbalance. Are you sluggish and melancholic? Too much black bile? Feverish and rude? Clearly, excess yellow bile. Remedies include drinking crushed beetles, bleeding out half a pint of your vitality, or having your feet whipped with nettles until the devil runs screaming out of your bones. The most popular treatment by far is bloodletting. You are drained. Sometimes by leech, sometimes by blade, depending on your status and whether the moon's in a particularly vindictive phase. Bloodletting is the medieval cure-all. Headache? Drain it. Cramps? Drain it. Pregnancy? Drain it, and hope for twins. The logic is brutally elegant: if you're sick, something inside you is bad, so let's remove it, preferably while you're still conscious and without any concept of what a germ is. Surgery is rare and horrifying. Performed without anesthesia, unless you count holy water and screaming. A festering wound might be lanced with a rusted iron rod. A broken bone reset. With the delicate method of just yank it until it screams less. Abscesses are drained. Tumors are cauterized. There are no stitches, only strips of cloth and prayers. The instruments are reused, unwashed, proudly seasoned with the infections of previous patients. If you survive the procedure, it's attributed to divine grace. If you die, well, clearly God had other plans. No one blames the doctor. He did what he could. The leech is promoted. Dentistry, if it can be called that, is worse. Toothaches are answered with hot pokers and pliers that look like they were designed for horses. There are no fillings, no root canals, just extraction via brute force and a friend to hold you down while you scream into a wooden spoon. The pain is immediate, blinding, and somehow preferable to the rot it replaces. Infections are common. Septicemia is a death sentence. And when your jaw swells and your face turns purple, people stop calling the healer and start calling the priest. And yet, amidst the blood and bile, there is herbalism, folk medicine practiced mostly by women who are occasionally accused of witchcraft if their poultices actually work. They offer willow bark for pain, moldy bread for wounds, and chamomile for nerves. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it does nothing. Sometimes it attracts the attention of the local magistrate, who wonders if healing without Latin is a sign of diabolic influence. You thank her anyway. Because at least she's not carving a demon out of your abdomen with a crucifix and a candle. And always, hovering over every ailment, is the church. Illness is sin made flesh. A cough might mean moral decay. A rash could be punishment for envy. Confession is part of the cure. If you're very sick, they call for last rites. Not a treatment, just a formality to prepare your soul for whatever comes next. Because in the Middle Ages, healing isn't science. It's hope, myth, and blood. You lie on your straw mattress, clutching your belly, and wait for either a miracle or a fever-dreamed angel to arrive with a clean blade and a steady hand. You won't get either. But you will get better. Or die. And frankly, no one's taking bets either way. Welcome to medicine, 1325 style. You'll feel better, eventually, because you'll either recover, or you won't. And that's a prognosis even a medieval doctor can't mess up. You wake up coughing. Again. But this time it's wetter, deeper, and tastes faintly of iron and inevitability. You tell yourself it's just the smoke from last night's fire, or maybe the damp wool clinging to your chest like a second skin. But in your gut you know better. The whispers started in the next village, someone fell ill, then someone else, then the baker's whole family turned purple and stiff overnight, and now the whispers are in your own throat. Welcome to the Black Death, the most democratic institution in medieval Europe. It doesn't care about your rank, your piety, or your ability to pay taxes. It comes for everyone, and it comes fast. First the fever, then the chills, then the buboes, those telltale swollen lymph nodes that sprout like demonic boils in your groin, your armpits, your neck. They blacken, they burst, they leak, and they smell like something trying to claw its way out of your body through rot and pus. You are now walking plague meat, and you've got about a coin-toss chance of surviving the week. The village knows. They can smell it. They don't say it outright, no one wants to call down the wrath of God, but you've noticed how people step further away when you speak, how they no longer share bread or offer their meat-stained jugs. Even the priest has stopped shaking your hand, which is probably a kindness because his hands are already covered in the invisible remains of the last dozen confessions. The village healer won't touch you. She offers a concoction of wormwood. And desperation tells you to stay warm and leaves it on your doorstep like a funeral gift. Your family pretends not to worry. Your mother insists it's just a chill. Your brother mutters about spoiled ale. But everyone's already planning where to dig the pit. You've heard the rumors, of course. Some say the Jews poisoned the wells. Which is as logical as blaming the moon for toothaches, but logic isn't medieval Europe's strong suit. Pogroms erupt. Whole communities are burned or drowned while the plague laughs and spreads. Others say it's a punishment, God's judgment on a world gone wicked with pride, lust, and the audacity to eat meat on a Friday. Flagellants march through towns whipping themselves raw, chanting psalms and bleeding on the cobbles as though hemorrhaging will please the Almighty. Meanwhile, rats scurry. Fleas bite. And the real cause, the microscopic terror lodged in the gut of a flea, crawls unnoticed through robes and rags and bedding, leaving behind a wake of groans and swollen corpses. When the plague comes in full, it doesn't knock politely. 1 day you're hauling grain. The next, you're leaking black bile and bleeding from places that shouldn't bleed. The village bells toll constantly, each chime a death, each silence the pause before the next one. Grave diggers run out of space, then run out of strength, then run away. The cemetery grows wild. Graves are stacked. Bodies are tossed. The dead are burned in pits with lime and prayers too hurried to matter. No one mourns properly. No one can. Mourning requires time and clean clothes. You have neither. Even priests stop performing last rites, overwhelmed or already dead. Instead, they yell blessings from a distance while swinging incense like it's bug spray. Quarantine doesn't exist. Not really. The sick are locked in their homes or dumped outside the village, left to die under the open sky. You might hear them at night, coughing, begging, screaming. Then nothing. People board up houses and paint crosses on the doors. Red means someone's sick. Black means someone's dead. The town turns into a checkerboard of contagion. Trade ceases. Markets vanish. Livestock wander untended. Hunger follows. The plague like a jealous sibling. The baker's gone. The miller's gone. The weaver's gone. And suddenly no one knows how to do anything except dig and wail and pray harder. Some try to flee. They pack what little they can and vanish into the woods, hoping fresh air and distance will shield them. Most of them return days later, sicker, weaker, dragging death back with them. Others hole up in their manors, barricading the gates and hoping the plague can't climb walls or bribe servants. It can. It does. The rich die, the poor die, the babies die, and the old survive just long enough to bury everyone else and forget why they started. And still, the rats scurry. The fleas bite. The cough spreads. Your cough spreads. And you lie there, shivering. In your straw bed, holding a damp rag to your mouth while your sister stares at you like she's memorizing your face before it goes slack. You might live. Some do. They emerge gaunt, scarred, and terrified of anyone who breathes too loudly. But if you die, it won't be in a hospital bed with flowers and whispered farewells. It'll be on dirt. In filth. Alone. Buried with lime. And forgotten. The plague will see you now. It doesn't take appointments. Just bodies. Yours included. It's evening now, and you've survived the day, barely. Your body aches in ways you've stopped cataloging, your skin is a living quilt of insect bites, sunburn, and blunt trauma, and your reward is now simmering in a blackened pot over a sputtering fire, dinner. The smell is ambiguous. Could be turnip. Could be old sock. Probably both. Food in 1325 is not an event, it's a chore, a gamble, and often an insult to your remaining dignity. You sit near the hearth, legs crossed like a penitent sinner, and peer into the pot with the desperate hope of a man staring down an executioner. Inside is pottage, again, because it's always pottage. The same boiling slurry of oats, water, wild greens, and despair that's been simmering on the same fire for days. Maybe weeks. New ingredients are just added on top, layer by layer, like geological sediment of bad decisions and spoiled produce. It's thick, grey-brown, and has the texture of porridge that gave up trying to be food. You ladle some into a wooden bowl, chipped from years of use and one memorable fight over the last piece of rabbit. It steams faintly, revealing bits of onion peel, wilted kale, and something you hope is barley. On special occasions, someone adds a marrow bone or a scrap of salted pork that's mostly gristle and memory. Tonight is not a special occasion. There is bread, of course. Always bread. Hard, coarse, and baked with as much grit as grain. It's black bread, rye, because wheat is for lords and saints, and it's dense enough to break teeth, which is poetic because it also contains enough stone dust from the mill to grind your molars to a flat, polished finish. You dip it in. the pottage to soften it, but all that does is make it damp and angry. Still, you chew. Slowly. Determinedly. Because food isn't about taste. It's about not dying. Again. Cheese makes an appearance sometimes. Not the creamy, romantic cheese of future centuries. Medieval cheese is sour, crumbly, and occasionally moving. Fresh milk spoils within hours, so it's curdled intentionally and salted to the brink of palatability. It's kept in a cloth, hung near the hearth, and tastes like goat's breath filtered through anxiety. You eat it anyway. Meat. Only if someone dies. Or if it's a feast day and your lord is feeling performatively generous. Chickens are too valuable for their eggs, pigs take years to fatten, and most game animals are legally protected for the nobility. Caught poaching a deer. You could lose a hand. Caught poaching a rabbit. Still illegal. Still punishable. So you stick to what's safe. The occasional rat, a lucky fish from the stream, maybe a bird so small it's more bones than nourishment. As for vegetables, they exist, but only in season and only the ones that can survive the abuse of medieval agriculture. Turnips. Cabbage. Leeks. On a lucky day, peas. All boiled until their nutrients flee in protest. Fruits are rarer still. Apples in the fall, if the frost doesn't get them first. Berries if you beat the birds to them. Anything else is fermented into cider, which doubles as drink and social. Lubricant. Spices. Forget it. A pinch of pepper costs more than your family's collective worth. Salt is precious and sometimes taxed. Flavor is accidental. Burned onions. Smoked wood. The faint, lingering aroma of whatever died in the chimney. Last winter. You eat with your hands or a crude wooden spoon that's been passed down and probably gnawed on by at least 3 generations of children. Plates are a luxury. Most people eat off slabs of stale bread called trenchers. These soak up the stew, then either get eaten, thrown to the dogs, or handed to beggars as a generous gesture of lukewarm charity. The dogs are smarter. They bury it. Drinks. More ale. Always ale. Flat, lukewarm, and teeming with the sediment of barley and questionable water. It's safer than what comes out of the well, and you've built up a tolerance to its bitter tang and the occasional floating surprise. You sip it with the quiet resignation of someone who knows this is the highlight of the meal. You eat quickly. In silence or in the company of slurping, coughing family members who've all accepted that food is fuel and flavor is heresy. If someone farts, no one laughs. If someone chokes, you slap their back and keep chewing. If someone dies mid-meal, you wait until after to mourn. Waste is a sin. And when it's over, you wipe your hands on your tunic, your mouth on your sleeve, and stare into the fire with the 1,000-yard stare of a man who has tasted hopelessness and found it bland. Welcome to dinner in the Middle Ages. It won't kill you. Not quickly, anyway. But it'll make you wish for a noble's death just for the chance to eat like you mattered. Night has fallen, dinner has settled like a curse in your gut, and the rats are beginning their nightly rituals under the floorboards, which means it's time to reflect on your soul, assuming you still have one. In 1325, religion isn't a personal choice, it's the air you breathe, the structure of your calendar, the excuse for every plague, war, crop failure, and toothache. You're not just a peasant, you're a Catholic peasant, baptized in infancy. Confessed by force and spiritually audited more frequently than your tax grain. The church owns your salvation, your fear, and the best real estate in the village. The local priest is a fixture in your life, a man who knows everyone's sins, secrets, and bowel movements because the confessional booth is more reliable than the town crier. He lives slightly better than the rest of you, sleeps alone, and gets first pick of the feasts, though he does spend a suspicious amount of time in the company of his housekeeper, a woman with more rosaries than explanations. Still, you trust him because he's literate, and literacy is indistinguishable from sorcery. Mass is mandatory. Every Sunday. No excuses. Not childbirth, not plagues, not your neighbor's corpse stiffening in your doorway. You drag yourself to the stone church, kneel on the cold floor, and mutter in Latin, a language you don't understand but know better than to question. The priest chants, smoke wafts, bells ring, and the wafer is lifted like a divine hostage. You don't receive communion unless you've confessed. And confession is mandatory too. Public if your sin is juicy enough. The list of sins includes everything from adultery and theft to sneezing too confidently and thinking about your landlord's wife while threshing wheat. You confess. You're forgiven. You sin again. It's a spiritual treadmill powered by guilt and repetition. The church dictates your time. The year is a patchwork of feast days, saints' days, fasts, vigils, and holy weeks during which certain foods are forbidden, certain actions are sinful, and certain people, usually women, are more likely to be accused of witchcraft. Lent arrives with its 40 days of culinary purgatory. Advent crawls in with extra prayers and fewer meals. Easter offers hope, and Christmas offers candles and a sermon about humility while your priest enjoys a roasted goose donated by someone afraid of eternal damnation. Every village has a patron saint, often one who died gruesomely and now protects you from equally gruesome fates, like drowning in your own sewage or being mauled by wolves. You light candles to this saint. You carve icons. You carry their bone fragment in a rusted locket and hope it wards off leprosy. Religion offers comfort, yes. It tells you there's a purpose to your suffering, that your short, brutish life is a prelude to eternal bliss, assuming you don't screw it up. But it also monitors you, judges you, punishes you. The fear of hell is as real as the mud on your boots. Hell is vivid, described in lurid detail by every sermon and painted in frescoes on the church wall where demons roast adulterers and boil tax cheats. You don't want to go there, but you probably will, because indulgences are expensive and your sins are plentiful. You give what you can, a chicken, a sack of flour, a third of your self-esteem. The priest nods, absolves, and subtly reminds you that purgatory is crowded and slow, and wouldn't it be nice to speed things up with a donation? Miracles are possible, but not expected. You might make a pilgrimage if you can afford to abandon your farm and risk death by bandit, plague, or bad directions to visit a holy site and touch a relic, a splinter from the true cross, a vial of Mary's milk, the toenail of Saint Cuthbert, lovingly encased in gold and kissed by thousands of other desperate mouths. These objects are sacred and probably fake. But you believe. Because believing is what's left when nothing else works. Your cow dies. God's will. Your son's fever breaks. God's mercy. Your harvest fails. God's punishment. Your neighbor thrives while you starve. Probably sorcery, but better bring it up with the priest before the accusations get messy. You don't question doctrine. Heresy is a death sentence, often by fire. The Inquisition isn't here yet, but rumors travel fast, and no one wants to be the reason the bishop visits with a cartload of chains and hot irons. Women, especially, tread lightly. Too much healing, too much wisdom, or too little subservience. And suddenly your garden is suspicious, your herbs are tools of Satan, and your cat is a demon familiar. Best to keep your head down, your prayers frequent, and your sins predictable. Religion is your hope. It's your fear. It's the thread holding your life together while slowly strangling you with holy beads. You sleep beside your crucifix, whispering to saints with names you can't spell, hoping that when you die, soon, probably, you'll land somewhere with fewer rats and more bread. Welcome to faith in the Middle Ages. It lifts you. It watches you. And it never lets you forget that suffering is sacred. And you, dear sinner, are very holy indeed. You're accused of theft. Not grand theft. Not high crime. Just a single loaf of bread that looked slightly unclaimed on your neighbor's windowsill and slightly more edible than the pottage your family's been gagging on for a week. Now you stand in the village square, mud on your boots, shame on your tunic, and dread in your gut, while the local reeve, an illiterate man appointed by a landlord who's never set foot in the region, decides your fate. Justice in 1325 is not about innocence or evidence. It's about visibility. You were seen. That's enough. Welcome to the legal system, a carnival of chaos where superstition wears the robe and punishment carries a very big stick. The law, if you can call it that, comes in 3 flavors: manorial, ecclesiastical, and royal. Royal courts are for serious crimes and serious people. You are neither. Ecclesiastical courts handle sins, heresies, and whether that woman who owns too many cats should be drowned. Manorial courts are your domain, presided over by the local lord steward or a bailiff who was promoted from stable boy to judge for his ability to yell and not die of dysentery. Your trial is public, of course. Everyone watches. The gossip flows faster than the beer, and your fate is essentially a spectator sport. There is no lawyer. You plead your case, stammering about hunger, desperation, and a misunderstanding involving a very aggressive goose. The reeve scratches his beard, glances at the baker, who shrugs and makes his decision. You are fined 3 shillings and publicly flogged. You don't have 3 shillings. You don't even know what a shilling looks like. So you take the flogging, shirt off, back bare, while the village jeers or pretends not to enjoy the sound of skin on stick. If you faint, they pour ale on your face and keep going. If you scream, they call it penance. If you survive, you're expected to thank them for the lesson. Other crimes. Worse. Caught poaching a rabbit from the Lord's forest. You lose a hand or an ear, or if the Lord is particularly bored that week, your entire head. Blasphemy. Stocks or a tongue removal if you're lucky. Accused of witchcraft. Trial by ordeal. They'll tie rocks to your ankles and throw you in a pond, sink and drown, you're innocent, float, and you're a witch. Either way, your chances are about as solid as your understanding of Latin. And don't even think about insulting someone of a higher class. That's not just rude, it's treason adjacent. You could be flogged, branded, exiled, or forced to wear a shame mask, a real iron contraption adorned with bells, spikes, and eternal humiliation. Justice is less about fairness and more about visibility. You're punished not for what you did, but for being caught doing it. Reputation is currency. A good one might save you. A bad one guarantees a short, itchy life. Women suffer doubly: suspected of adultery, flogged, suspected of gossiping, public penance, suspected of having opinions. Which? Children aren't spared. They are whipped like adults, held accountable like adults, and die in prison like adults. If they are inconvenient enough. And prisons? Oh yes, they exist. But not as correctional facilities. They are holding cells, festering stone pits where you rot until someone pays your fine or forgets you exist. No food, no bedding, no rights. You go in healthy, come out a skeleton or a ghost. Torture isn't common in your village, there's not enough bureaucracy for that, but it happens. A hot iron here, a boot press there, always in service of confession, which is the preferred evidence. And once you confess, under duress or delirium, that's it. Trial's over. Sentence passed. Justice served cold and covered in dirt. You've seen a hanging. Everyone has. It's festive. The gallows creak in the square, the crowd gathers, the children squirm with gory glee. The condemned is marched through the streets, a rope necklace around their neck, and offered a final word that's usually a cough or a sob. The executioner, often a local drunk pressed into service, does his job with all the finesse of a man trying to fix a cart wheel. With a hammer, the drop is short. The neck doesn't always snap. Sometimes they strangle for minutes while the priest prays and the crowd slowly grows bored. Then you go back to work, to hunger, to silence. Justice in the Middle Ages isn't blind. It sees you very clearly. It sees your poverty, your desperation, your tattered clothes and mud-crusted feet, and it decides you're guilty before you speak. It's a tool of order, wielded like a club. It doesn't rehabilitate. It doesn't forgive. It punishes to remind you that power rests not in truth but in spectacle. And tomorrow, when someone else is in the stocks, you'll watch too. Because it's safer to be in the audience than on the platform. Welcome to Law and Order, medieval style. Don't blink too loud, and you might make it to next week. You step across the threshold of your home, not a door so much as a warped plank of wood barely hinged to the rotting frame, and immediately breathe in the scent of poverty distilled. It's a perfume of damp straw, old smoke, fermented goat, and the lingering ghosts of 17 unwashed feet. Your hovel is technically a house if one stretches the definition to include 4 walls and a roof made of despair. It's one room, always one room, because privacy is a sin against humility and architecture. There are no windows, just holes, patched with cloth and hope, and no chimney, so the smoke from your fire coils around the rafters before descending like a slow vengeance onto your lungs. The floor is dirt, sometimes packed, sometimes loose, sometimes suspiciously moist, depending on which livestock has visited or what tragedy has recently leaked from the roof. That roof is thatch, straw woven together with optimism and mold, full of holes in the winter and wasps in the summer. When it rains inside too, because water does not respect social boundaries or class lines. You place pots to catch the drips, but there are never enough pots, and sometimes the water smells funny, which means something dead is decomposing. Above you. Again. Your furniture consists of a stool, a low bench, and a table that was once a door, then a sled, and now shakes when you breathe near it. You eat on it, sew on it, give birth on it, die on it. Dual purpose. Efficient. Your bed is a pile of straw laid with whatever fabric hasn't been stolen or burned, and you share it with your spouse, your children, and sometimes a goat that won't stay outside because your walls are made of wattle and daub, sticks and mud, and it has figured out how to nudge the wall loose with its face. The mattress is lumpy, damp, and populated by an entire ecosystem of lice, fleas, and beetles that crawl out at night to remind you that God created all creatures, even the ones nesting in your armpit. Lighting is a tallow candle if you're lucky, a pine splinter if you're not. You don't waste firewood for brightness. Fire is for cooking and warmth, and firewood is more precious than honesty. If you have a hearth, it's little more than a smoky hole in the wall, its stones blackened from years of boiling the same pottage and burning the same fingers. Smoke fills the room because draft design is a future innovation, and you cough so much your neighbors can identify you by rhythm alone. The walls are dark with soot, except for the religious icon crudely scratched into the beam above the fire. A cross, a saint, maybe a chicken with a halo. It's hard to tell. It wards off evil, or maybe just helps you focus when you pray not to. Freeze to death. Storage. A shelf if you're lucky. A box if you're not. You hang things from hooks, tools, bags, bones with sentimental value, and keep your grain in a sack high enough to avoid the rats but not so high the children can't reach it and ruin your entire month's rations by knocking it into the fire. Your clothing hangs from pegs near the fire to keep the mold from growing too enthusiastically. It still does. It always does. The air in your hovel is heavy with damp, heavy with breath, heavy with the accumulated history of every cough, fart, prayer, and curse that's ever echoed within its wooden confines. And then there are the animals. Chickens, pigs, maybe a goat or two. They live inside with you, especially in winter, not out of affection but necessity. Animals mean warmth, even if that warmth comes with hooves and the constant risk of stepping on something you thought had already been cleaned up. You build a barrier with straw bales, but they hop it. They always hop it. Sometimes they sleep on your feet. Sometimes they gnaw your blanket. And when they get sick, you get sick, because there's no distinction between your air and theirs. The hovel is a shared lung. You try to keep it clean. You sweep with a bundle of twigs, throw water on the floor to settle the dust, chase out the larger pests with a stick, but it's a battle you lose every day. Clean is relative. Clean is a fantasy. Clean means no visible dung and only one dead mouse. That's a win. That's enough. You curl into the straw with your family, your back aching, your nose numb, and your thoughts drifting to tomorrow's firewood, tomorrow's pottage, tomorrow's frost. Welcome home. It's not much, but it's yours until the Lord raises taxes, the roof collapses, or the river floods again. Then it'll be mud and memory. But for tonight, it's a roof, a fire, and a space where your breath fogs the air in rhythm with 6 others. That's not peace. That's not safety. That's medieval domestic bliss. You've clawed your way through another day of blistering work, watery pottage, communal lie-sharing, and the omnipresent background hum of existential dread, which means it's time to relax, if such a word even exists in 1325. Leisure in the Middle Ages isn't scheduled, earned, or gently suggested by a self-care influencer with flaxen robes and lavender oil. It arrives when work pauses, when the sun dips, or when someone dies interestingly enough to draw a crowd. Entertainment, for the average medieval peasant, is a bizarre cocktail of violence, superstition, booze, and boredom dressed up as communal joy. If you're in a village, your options are limited by both geography and what hasn't been outlawed by the church this week. There's no theatre, no library, no symphony, no tavern trivia night. But there is the alehouse, a structure that barely qualifies as architecture, usually built from salvaged timber, stale air, and rumors. Inside, it's dark, loud, and slippery. Everyone drinks from the same cup if they are close, or the same barrel if they are not. The ale is weak, the mugs are communal, and the conversation is limited to weather, livestock, and who may or may not be possessed. Laughter erupts occasionally, usually following a crude joke, a goat-related accident, or someone farting with enough volume to qualify as regional news. Music happens, but it's not elegant. No lutes serenade your pain. Here. Instead, a man with one functioning eye and an instrument resembling a mangled washboard hammers out a rhythm while peasants clap offbeat and someone tries to dance with the coordination of a concussed ox. Songs are bawdy. They are about infidelity, flatulence, saints with suspicious habits, and that one time the miller fell into his own grain sack and cried. They are passed down orally, warped with every telling, and sung with the volume of desperation and the pitch of intoxication. Instruments are rare. Your body is your drum. Your clogs, your percussion. If someone owns a fiddle, they are a god. If they can tune it, they are a sorcerer. If they play well, they are not from around here. Festivals, when they happen, are a riot of excess. Not elegant processions. Not dignified ceremonies. Just unregulated chaos loosely anchored to the feast day of a saint whose miracles include surviving intestinal rot or sneezing during prayer. The village square becomes a stage. There are jesters who juggle, stumble, and mock authority just enough to entertain but not enough to be hanged. There are acrobats who aren't so much athletic as disturbingly flexible. There are puppet shows featuring devils, saints, and an unhealthy number of exploding pigs. Mystery plays act out biblical stories with all the subtlety of a bear in heat. God is played by the loudest man in the village, and Satan always gets the biggest laughs. Everyone drinks. Everyone shouts. Someone always gets injured. The line between performance and fight is thin and often punctuated by a hurled turnip. Games exist, of course. Simple ones. Stick and hoop. Toss the bone. Shove the drunk into the ditch and pretend it's a sport. Children play tag, catch, and other variants of structured chaos, often with rocks. Adults gamble with dice carved from sheep knuckles, playing games where the rules are vague and the consequences include debt or duel. Wrestling matches break out often, not always intentionally. There's a game called stool ball, a distant relative of cricket, where the goal is to hit a ball and not die of shame. Sports aren't formalized. They are just more excuses to burn off anger and prove who's still young enough to stand afterward. Sometimes, when the priest isn't looking, there's dancing. Not graceful, not choreographed, just people spinning and stomping in the mud while someone plays a pipe and everyone pretends their knees aren't exploding. Courtly dances exist, but they are for people who wear silk and don't have to milk goats at dawn. You watch from the edge, feet blistered, heart heavier than your stomach, and wonder what it would be like to dance for beauty instead of survival. And then there's violence. Always. Executions are public, of course. So are punishments. Stocks, whippings, nose removals, they are all community events. Children get the front row. The condemned is often your neighbor, your cousin, or someone who owed you a chicken. You cheer. Not because you're cruel, but because it's the one moment the suffering isn't yours. So yes, you entertain yourself. Not with comfort. Not with peace. But with ale, noise, and a frenzied kind of survival joy. You clap, you laugh, you scream, and for a few moments you forget that your boots are full of mud and your future is statistically negligible. Welcome to medieval fun. It won't last. But neither will you. So dance while you can. Tomorrow brings pottage. Again. You're poor. Not metaphorically. Not the kind of poor that involves budgeting apps or skipping brunch. You're medieval poor, which means your class is carved into your flesh like a birthmark and tattooed on your daily agony. Feudalism is not a ladder. It's a mud pit, and the only people with ropes are the ones using them to hang tax evaders. You were born into your class and you will die in it, probably early, probably cold, and probably while holding a hoe or a screaming baby or both. Social mobility is a myth told by minstrels who've drunk too much mead and want to believe merit exists. You are a serf, which is a fancy word for state-sanctioned slave who gets to keep their shoes and a turnip if they are lucky. You work land you don't own. You live in a house you don't control. You grow food you won't eat. Everything you do is for your Lord, who lives in a manor 3 miles away and smells faintly of wine and moral decay. He doesn't know your name. He knows your tithe. Class determines everything. What you wear. What you eat. How you speak. Who you can marry. What diseases you'll die from. Your clothing is will dyed brown by mud, age, and your own sweat. His is imported velvet trimmed with fur from animals you're not even allowed to look at without permission. You eat pottage and bread with gravel in it. He eats roast swan and spices that cost more than your entire house. You speak a dialect of Old English that sounds like a throat condition. He speaks French, or Latin, or some educated abomination of syllables you couldn't pronounce even if you still had teeth. He courts noble daughters with land and alliances. You marry the girl next door because she knows how to kill lice and hasn't died of plague yet. Taxes are your love language. You pay to use the mill. You pay to graze your sheep. You pay to cross a bridge, enter a market, or breathe too enthusiastically during Mass. Every year, the reeve shows up with a list of what you owe, and every year, the list gets longer. If you complain, they call it rebellion. If you run, they call it treason. If you die, they jest add your widow's name to the ledger. You're not just poor. You're property. And the system doesn't care if you're loyal or lazy, honest or crooked, hard-working or half-dead. It only cares that your corpse doesn't rot before the harvest. The rich don't suffer like you. When famine hits, they open another wine barrel and start blaming you for poor prayer hygiene. When plague comes, they retreat behind stone walls and pray loudly while sending you out to burn the infected. When war breaks out, they ride into battle wearing metal suits that cost more than your village, while you're handed a pointy stick and told to make God proud. If you're lucky, you die fast. If you're unlucky, you come back missing a limb, a friend, and your last illusion about valor. Laws are written by the rich, for the rich, and enforced by people too bored or too cruel to care about nuance. You steal a loaf of bread. Stocks. He defrauds an entire county. A strongly worded letter and a new title. You build a hovel without permission. Demolition and a fine. He builds a hunting lodge on sacred land. Praise for his contribution to royal leisure. You are born into guilt. He is born into grace. That's the whole system. Even religion plays favorites. Your pew is at the back, behind the drafty pillar, next to the dog that keeps peeing on the relics. His is front and center, gilded, perfumed, and blessed by a bishop who dines with the devil when he's not reciting Latin over gold-plated dinnerware. Your sins are policed. His are excused. You confess to lustful thoughts about bread with raisins. He confesses to accidental manslaughter and gets a candle lit in his honor. Justice bends toward wealth like grass in a storm. And you are the mud it grows from. There's no uprising. Not yet. Not here. Peasants revolt occasionally, but it's like slapping a stone wall with a wet trout. You dream, sometimes, of change, of fairness, of a world where effort means something. But mostly, you dream of bread that doesn't splinter, boots that don't leak, and a roof that doesn't fall in when it rains. Welcome to class in medieval Europe. You are the base of the pyramid, the fodder for feasts, the blood in the soil. You exist to serve, to suffer, and to be forgotten. And if you're very, very lucky, you'll die before the next tax. You wake up in darkness because you never learned to count the hours, and even if you did, clocks are for cathedrals and men in robes who read Latin while drinking imported wine and pretending to be celibate. You don't read. You don't write. You don't even know your own birthday. Education in 1325 is a privilege reserved for monks, priests, and the occasional noble's son who hasn't yet died of syphilis or fallen off a horse. You learn with your hands, your back, and your bruised knuckles. Your alphabet is a rake. Your grammar is the sound wheat makes when it resists the scythe. The closest you've come to a book is the Bible chained to the church pulpit, written in a language you don't speak and guarded like it's made of gold, and it is, partially, because no one trusts a peasant with parchment. If you are lucky enough to be male, rich, and born under a favorable star, you might enter a monastic school. There you will be taught the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, which is academic code for arguing in Latin until your opponent cries. If you are female, even noble, education is limited to embroidery, the Psalms, and how to look decorative without encouraging lustful thoughts. For the rest of us, there's the school of life, where tuition is paid in calluses and exams. Involve surviving winter. A handful of village boys might be chosen by the priest to serve as altar boys, which means memorizing chants and not tripping during Mass. If one shows promise, defined loosely as doesn't eat the communion wafers when unsupervised, he might be sent to a cathedral school. That's the pipeline, peasant to priest via holy babysitting. But for 99% of us, education is a distant echo from a bell tower we are not allowed to enter. You've heard of letters, vaguely. You've seen them on signs carved into wood. Illegible swirls surrounded by faded paint and warnings about tithes. You assume they are magical symbols used to keep track of sins and who's behind on their sheep quotas. The priest reads aloud every Sunday, eyes scanning the pages like they are windows to heaven, and you nod along, pretending the words aren't slipping past you like rain off a thatched roof. You learn from repetition. Oral tradition. Someone tells you something. You repeat it. You believe it. Truth is whatever the loudest voice insists it is, and if that voice wears robes, you don't argue. Knowledge is hoarded. Monks copy books by hand in scriptoriums so cold the ink freezes mid-word. Each page is a labor of weeks, each mistake scraped off with a knife, and every illuminated letter a small act of divine narcissism. The books themselves are chained to desks, locked in trunks, or buried in abbey libraries where sunlight fears to tread. If you ask to see one, they laugh. If you persist, they suspect heresy. Knowledge is power, and power belongs to those who don't sweat for their supper. Your own education consists of learning how not to die. You learn which mushrooms won't kill you. You learn how to tie a sheaf of wheat so it doesn't rot in the barn. You learn how to dodge the reeve, how to patch a tunic without thread, how to tell when a cough means plague and when it's just the air trying to murder you slowly. You learn from your mother's scoldings, your father's groans, your neighbors' failures. You learn that curiosity gets people drowned, and cleverness is only useful if it's quiet. You memorize prayers, not because you understand them, but because forgetting them means the priest glares and your soul gets booked for a fiery vacation. The elite debate Aristotle while you debate how many rats you can kill before dinner. They discuss theology, you discuss drainage. They write letters. You tie knots. They record history. You are history. Unwritten, unmentioned, unmissed. Your thoughts, your stories, your truths, they die with you, unless someone remembers to tell them over a fire and someone else bothers to listen. Welcome to education in the Middle Ages. You won't be taught to read. You'll be taught to obey. And if you ask too many questions, you'll be taught to burn. You are 14 years old and your father informs you that you are getting married next Sunday, which is about as romantic as being sentenced to dig your own latrine. There's no courting, no candle at dinners, no whispered sonnets beside the moat. There's a pig involved. Sometimes a goose. Occasionally a dowry, if your family can afford to part with anything that isn't vital for surviving the winter. Marriage in 1325 is not a union of souls, it's an economic merger with shared debt and joint exposure to typhus. Love might happen, eventually, like mildew in the corners of your shared hovel. But more often it doesn't. Your new spouse is probably someone you've known since infancy, someone you've worked beside in the fields, traded lice with during feast days, or watched cry after getting whipped for stealing bread. Attraction is irrelevant. Compatibility means neither of you has actively tried to kill the other this month. For women, marriage means a swift transition from one overlord to another. Your father owns you until the wedding, your husband owns you after. You don't take vows so much as surrender. Your body becomes a factory for heirs and laborious, and the church nods approvingly while reminding you that pleasure is a sin, unless it's a sin you didn't enjoy. Consent is murky. Legal codes mention it vaguely, but in practice, the line between duty and coercion is thinner than your wedding veil, which was probably borrowed, stained, and last used as a swaddling cloth. You are expected to be a virgin, a saint, and a midwife all at once. If you're lucky, your husband doesn't smell too much like fermented cabbage and doesn't snore like a dying ox. If you're unlucky, he's violent, drunk, or gone half the year fighting a war he doesn't understand. For men, marriage can be slightly better, depending on how drunk they are and how many pigs their wife brought to the household. They are still expected to provide, protect, and procreate, but they aren't judged for enjoying themselves. A man with a wandering eye might be scolded. A woman with a wandering eye gets burned. A man's infidelity is seen as weakness. A woman is seen as witchcraft. Equality is not on the guest list. Widowhood is the only silver lining. If you survive your husband, you get a sliver of legal independence. You can own property, run a business, sue a neighbor. For a brief, precious moment, you're free to breathe without supervision. But don't get comfortable, someone will try to marry you off again. Because a woman alone is dangerous. A woman alone might start thinking. And medieval society simply cannot abide by that. So here you are, married, exhausted, bleeding monthly under layers of linen and shame, trying to remember what your own body felt like before it became a vessel for lineage and obligation. You share meals, memories, and maybe a faint, persistent affection with the person beside you. Or maybe not. Maybe you lie awake each night wondering what would have happened if you'd run away with the stable boy, or joined a nunnery, or drowned in the mill pond before the wedding bells rang. Welcome to marriage in the Middle Ages. It's not a fairy tale. It's not even a partnership. It's survival with a shared tax rate and a mutual tendency to snore. And if you're lucky, very lucky, you'll outlive it. You wake up to find your neighbor dead. Again. Not a dramatic death. No wailing or curses. Just silence, a slumped figure in a corner, a bowl of unfinished pottage now attracting flies that understand grief better than most priests. In 1325, death is not an event, it's a routine. A constant. A weather pattern. You do not fear it so much as accommodate it, like a distant relative who visits often and never brings anything useful. You live knowing that any sneeze could be a prelude, any cough a prologue, and that death prefers the young, the useful, and the unready. Causes of death are legion. Illness, of course. Fevers that boil you from the inside. Colds that settle in your lungs like guests overstaying there. Welcome. Cuts that fester, limbs that swell, buboes that burst with the sort of efficiency only nature can design. You could die from childbirth, from starvation, from stepping on a nail. You could die from a bad oyster, a cold wind, or because a priest misdiagnosed your migraine as demonic possession and ordered a trepanation performed with a spoon. Violence is a popular reaper too. A drunken argument in the alehouse. A brawl over firewood. A Lord's soldier swinging too wide with his morning star during a show of force. Justice might kill you, whether deserved or not. Accidents might do it faster, falling from a cart, drowning in a stream, choking on your own tooth. And if none of those get you, there's always war. Your village is a convenient tax base, a strategic location, or just happens to be in the way. Mercenaries come through, take your livestock, torch your barn, and laugh while doing it. You hide in the woods and hope your hut isn't interesting enough to burn. Death visits without appointment. It comes in sleep, in labor, in the middle of supper. It leaves behind bodies that must be dealt with. You do not embalm. You do not delay. You bury quickly, sometimes the same day, because the stench comes faster than the priest and the flies come before both. The graveyard swells. Graves are shallow, marked with sticks or stones unless you're rich enough to merit a name carved in anything more permanent than memory. Children are buried in clusters. Women buried in childbirth robes. Men buried in work clothes, boots on. If you're lucky, because no one wants to wrestle a corpse out of frozen leather. There are no funerals like you imagine. There are rituals, yes, and prayers, but mostly just people standing in the cold, muttering platitudes and already thinking about who will inherit the dead man's goat. Mourning is brief. It has to be. Fields still need sowing. The cow still needs milking. The plague doesn't pause just because your aunt stopped breathing. You cry when you can afford to. And most days you can't. The church has thoughts on death, of course. They tell you it's the beginning of your eternal life, which is a lovely way to frame decomposition. They warn you about sin, hell, and purgatory, about the flaming torments that await if you die unshriven or unpaid. Tithes don't end when you stop breathing. Someone still needs to pay for prayers, masses, and candles to help your soul float upward like a hot air balloon full of guilt and back taxes. Can't afford it. Enjoy purgatory. It's standing room only. The smell of death is part of life. You recognize it immediately, sweet, rancid animal. You catch it in your house, in your neighbor's hovel, on your own clothes if you've spent the day helping drag bodies from a flooded granary. You bury them with lime if you have it. You burn them if you dare. You whisper their names and try not to dwell on the fact that no one will remember yours. Death comes in waves. A famine year might take a third of the village. A plague year, half. A good year still sees a funeral every week or so. You know more dead than living. Your family tree is more stump than sapling. You love people with a awareness that they could vanish mid-sentence. But still, you live. You wake up with sore joints and dirt in your mouth and lice in your hair, and you keep going, because life is not about happiness, it's about continuation. Survival is success. Each day you don't die is a quiet rebellion against statistics. You feed the fire. You patch the roof. You hold your child and hope they make it to adulthood, which is to say 20. And when death finally comes, when it creeps into your limbs, or crashes through your ribs, or simply stops your breath mid-laugh, you won't be surprised. You'll sigh. Maybe whisper a prayer. Maybe just close your eyes. Welcome to death in the Middle Ages. It's punctual. It's efficient. And it's always just over your shoulder, waiting patiently for you to look away. The sun disappears behind the horizon like it owes you money, and with it goes your last illusion of safety. Night in 1325 is not quiet, nor restful, nor even particularly dark in the poetic sense. It is pitch black, suffocating, and filled with the kind of dread that makes your skin twitch like it remembers something you don't. There are no street lamps. No lanterns glowing in windows. Candles are precious, oil is expensive, and firewood is always vanishing faster than your neighbors during a tax collection. So you huddle in your hovel, wrapped in damp wool, listening to the sounds outside like an animal about to be hunted. Wolves howl, dogs bark, pigs grunt, and something, not quite rodent, not quite ghost, scuttles across your roof. You pretend not to hear it. Everyone pretends not to hear it, because to acknowledge it might be to invite it in. The night is haunted. Not by fiction, but by fact. Thieves and bandits prowl the roads, knowing that the local lord's protection ends when his guards fall asleep. Spirits are said to wander. The dead don't always stay where you buried them, especially if their soul was unpaid for or their grave was too shallow to hold in the remorse. You recite prayers in the dark, half remembered and mumbled into your straw, trying to keep the demons of sleep paralysis at bay. They say if you sleep wrong, on your back, mouth open, you're inviting old hag to sit on your chest and steal your breath. You'd sleep on your side, but the straw is crawling and the children already took the less cursed positions. You bar the door, not because it will stop anything determined, but because it makes you feel like you tried. It creaks anyway. Everything creaks. The wood creaks. Your bones creak. Something in the floor creaks that isn't you, and you tell yourself it's settling, not crawling. If someone knocks, you don't answer. If someone whispers, you pretend you didn't hear. Travelers are rare at night. Good ones are even rarer. It might be a neighbor dying in the cold. Or it might be worse. You never know until morning, and by then it's usually too late. You don't go outside. The darkness isn't just a lack of light, it's a presence. You could step out and vanish. Fall into a ditch. Be dragged off by something with claws. And a theological grievance. The church warns about temptations that walk at night. The devil prefers moonlight. Witches gather under trees and dance barefoot with spirits of the damned. That's what they say. You've never seen it, but then again, you've never looked. Too busy trying not to breathe too loud. You sleep in shifts. Not formally. Not because you planned it. Just because sleep never comes easily. Someone is always coughing. Someone is always snoring. Someone is always dreaming too loud, whimpering through another memory of famine or fire or that time the plague took half the family and the baby wouldn't. Stop crying. You lie still, eyes open, counting your breath, hoping the warmth in your feet outlasts the fear in your stomach. You don't dream of better things. You dream of survival. Of light. Of waking up. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes your neighbor doesn't. And the morning brings the stiff reality that one less bowl will be needed today. Time doesn't pass at night. It stretches. It groans. Hours become eons. You think it's nearly morning and then realize the moon hasn't moved. You could get up. Stoke the fire. Check the livestock. But then you'd have to step outside. And even the goat knows better than that. You hear things out there. Branches snapping. Hooves clattering. A scream that's almost human. It might be a fox. It might be a soul in torment. You don't investigate. You pray. You whisper. You hide. Eventually, the darkness lifts. Slowly. With reluctance. Like it's giving you one more day out of spite. The rooster crows and you exhale like you've been underwater. The world reappears, draped in dew and regret. You survived another night, which means you've won. For now. You stretch. You yawn. You scratch the fleas back into submission and prepare to repeat everything, because daytime isn't safe either. Just better lit. Welcome to night in the Middle Ages. It is not your friend. It does not forgive. It watches you sleep. And dares you to dream. Morning brings little relief. The sun rises, yes, but only to illuminate the fact that you are still here, still sore, still shackled to a system older than your grandfather's lice. And towering above your village like a stone sentinel is the church, spiritual gatekeeper, landlord of the afterlife, and unofficial tax collector for God. You see the spire before you see your own reflection in a puddle. It's taller than any house, cleaner than any conscience, and holier than thou by architectural design. Every stone whispers that your soul is not yours. It belongs to the church, and they are leasing it back to you one sin at a time. Religion isn't a belief here. It's infrastructure. The church decides when you are born, what you are named. Who you marry, how you eat, when you fast, when you can have sex, and when you must pretend not to enjoy it. It teaches you to confess weekly, tithe regularly, and fear constantly. The priest is not just a preacher, he is the moral police, social judge, and sometimes the only literate man for miles. He hears your secrets, blesses your livestock, buries your family, and threatens you with hellfire in the same tone he uses to request more eggs. You tithe. Of course you tithe. 10% of everything, your grain, your chickens, your coin if you have any. It doesn't matter if you have enough left to survive. God's share comes first, and God, conveniently, accepts payment via clergy. You've tried skipping a tithe. Once. The priest noticed. Everyone noticed. Suddenly you're not just poor, you're suspicious. And in a village this size, suspicion spreads faster than leprosy and sticks harder than dung on wool. So you pay. You always pay. You pay to baptize your children, to bury your parents, to light candles for the souls you're not sure made it. You pay indulgences too, little bribes to shorten your time in purgatory, which, based on sermons, is like a divine waiting room with fire pits and accusatory angels. Can't afford indulgences? Better start praying. Hard. Mass is mandatory. Even if you can't understand it. It's in Latin, of course, a language as dead as your ambitions. You kneel on cold stone, repeat words you've never read, and listen to the priest recite divine mysteries with the casual menace of a man who knows he controls your eternal fate. You try not to fall asleep. You try not to cough too loud. You try not to envy the noble's cushioned pew. The Eucharist is a wafer and a miracle, unless you've sinned that week without confessing, in which case consuming it might damn you even further. You aren't entirely sure. The theology is vague, intentionally so. Certainty is reserved for those with gold crosses and better boots. The Church regulates your calendar. Over 150 feast days a year, but don't expect cake. They are holy days, not holidays. You attend more services. You fast more. You watch your neighbors get whipped for eating butter on St. John's Eve because the monk forgot to announce the dispensations. Lent is starvation with piety. Advent is candlelight and cold repentance. There are no vacations. There are vigils, confessions, and processions through muddy streets while the statue of a saint, usually missing a limb, is carried aloft by boys who've memorized the order of psalms but not their own birthdays. The Church has relics too, bones of saints, tears of virgins, splinters of the true cross. Each one promises blessings, miracles, and the possibility that your goats won't miscarry this season. You kiss the glass, drop a coin, and pretend you didn't notice the relic looks suspiciously like a chicken femur wrapped in silk. You don't question. Questioning is heresy. And heresy gets you tried, whipped, or burned, depending on how bored. The bishop is. Women fare worse. They are either Eve or Mary, sinner or virgin, nothing in between. Too much knowledge, and you're a witch. Too little submission, and you're unnatural. A widow has power, briefly, until she marries again. Or becomes a nun, trading one prison for another. Monasteries are cleaner than your house, yes, and filled with books, yes, but also vow-bound, silence enforced, and spiritually policed by monks who may or may not understand humility. And yet, despite it all, the Church is your comfort. It is the only thing that promises justice in a world where none exists. It says your suffering matters. That your soul is not forgotten. That the pain you endure is not meaningless, but redemptive. It offers you heaven if you behave. And if not, well, there's always purgatory. Or worse. Welcome to the Church in the Middle Ages. It blesses you. It taxes you. It buries you. And all it asks in return is everything you are and everything you'll never be. Your soul is safe because it no longer belongs to you. There is no clock in your village. No bells to mark the hour unless the Church is feeling particularly generous, and even then they chime vaguely, as if time is less a fixed reality and more a rumor spread by monks who count on fingers and moonlight. You don't know what time it is. No one does. You know when the sun rises, when the cock crows, when the shadows stretch, when your stomach growls. Time in 1325 is a loop, not a line. There are no hours, only chores. No minutes, only miseries. You measure your day by what's rotting, what's aching, and how long since your last meal. The year isn't divided into quarters or seasons but into when things grow, when things die, and when the Lord's bailiff arrives to collect what little is left. The rhythm is agricultural, elemental, unforgiving. Spring means planting, blistered hands, and praying the rain comes. Summer means endless daylight, aching backs, and sunburns so deep they become religious experiences. Autumn is harvest, a desperate, blistered rush to gather what you can before the frost strangles it all. Winter is just waiting. Waiting for death, for hunger, for the sky to soften again. Your calendar is liturgical. Not secular, not civic, but spiritual. Time belongs to the church. Days are saints' days, feast days, fasting days, and holy days that all require different clothes, different behaviors, different confessions. You don't know it's Wednesday. You know it's St. Euphemia's Day, and that means no meat. Extra prayers, and possibly a miracle if the priest isn't too hungover to mumble his Latin properly. Weeks pass without clarity. Sundays are your only constant, a marker in the fog where you kneel on cold stone, mutter incomprehensible responses, and try not to fall asleep during the fifth reading about sin, goats, and the infernal consequences of laughter. You don't celebrate birthdays. You probably don't know yours. Birth records are an idea for nobles and monks. You were born sometime after the big flood but before the barn burned down, and that's as precise as your mother ever got. Age is approximate. You're young until you're not. Old until you're dead. The children grow in inches, not years, and the elderly shrink into memory, their lives measured by how many winters they endured and how many teeth they lost in the process. Time is personal only in hindsight. You don't plan far ahead. There's no 5-year plan, no retirement age, no golden years. You plan for the next frost, the next tax, the next birth or burial, sometimes on the same day. You plant turnips and hope they don't rot. You brew beer and hope the yeast behaves. Time mocks ambition. It swallows plans whole. If you speak of next year with too much hope, someone will hush you. That's how you tempt fate, they say. You speak of the future in hushed tones, like a secret you're not supposed to know yet. And yet, despite the murky haze, time rules your life. Not with clocks, but with seasons. The seasons are everything. When to shear. When to sow, when to bury. The solstice isn't a celestial event, it's a survival checkpoint. Midsummer might bring a festival. Midwinter brings despair. You can't read the stars, but you know the signs, the color of the trees, the temperature of the wind, the way the chickens behave before a storm. You feel time in your joints. You smell it in the air. You taste it in your bread when the yeast has turned sour and the flour was milled from desperation. Nobles have timepieces, sundials, astrolabes, hourglasses filled with imported sand and importance. You have your shadow, the arc of the sun across the pigsty, the way the village square empties as the light fades, and everyone remembers that. Nighttime has teeth. Time is owned by the powerful. Measured, divided, sold. You borrow it in moments, stolen glances, whispered stories, a rare evening without the sound of weeping. Then it slips away again, lost to labor, to hunger, to sleep. Too shallow to count. Time doesn't belong to you. It never did. It belongs to the land, the church, the tax collector, the weather. You endure it. Endure the slow, grinding wheel that turns whether you move or not. Welcome to medieval timekeeping. There is no ticking, no ringing. Just the slow, constant erosion of your life, measured in chores, aches, and the shadow that always gets longer before the dark swallows you whole.